Absolutely. I have presets that I own for Lightroom, even though I don't use them all that much. But yeah, absolutely. Any of the presets that you have. And oddly enough, I had an issue about a month ago where my whole suite, for some reason, somehow or another, I don't know how, something I did probably, my whole suite was corrupt. So I had to completely um, use Adobe's Cleaner and completely get it off my computer and reinstall everything. And amazingly enough, when I reinstalled everything, all the presets that I had purchased showed up in Lightroom. I'm not sure how that happened, but it did. So it was kind of cool. But yeah, you can definitely reinstall if you have the original files for your or the original files or the original purchase for your presets. Yeah, absolutely, all that stuff can be reinstalled. Running Lightroom in that capacity and Photoshop, it's just like owning them. Like I said, the only difference is you get any updates or upgrades that they have at no additional cost, and it's a huge cost savings. I over the years I've spent literally thousands of dollars between the Master Suite and Photoshop and upgrades and so on and so forth, and I don't even want to count the money that I've spent on it. So this is saving me a ton of money. But yeah, absolutely. Any of the presets that you have for Lightroom, I know a lot of people, and I also have a set of presets for Photoshop. All that stuff can be reinstalled as long as you have the original files, and you would just pretty much follow the path of being able to reinstall those the way you did in the first place. So just make sure you have your original files or your original purchases. I'm guessing that the question is do I think Lightroom standalone will eventually go away? I'm guessing it will, because like I said, they're not going to be supporting it like they support Lightroom CC. So Lightroom 6, like I said, they may have some bug fixes, as they find them, as they come across them, over, I don't know what their period of time is going to be for that. But at some point the support for that will stop. Anything that they have in major upgrades or additional features or anything like that are not going to be available to Lightroom 6 users. So I think the plan is to get everybody to go with a subscription service. Now I'm not sure. The price has kind of fluctuated on Lightroom 6. If you don't mind, would you mind my asking how much you paid for Lightroom 6? Okay. It was actually, it actually went up because for a little while, I think when they came out with version 5, for a little while they dropped the price to $79. I can't remember how long that lasted, but to see that it's gone up quite a bit in that time is a little disheartening. Again, I think it's probably to encourage people to go over to the CC side of things. And I mentioned this in the video that I had made, is that people are just dead set against this subscription service model, and that's fine. I can appreciate their position and everything, but like I said, I've been using Photoshop for 24 years. I've been using Lightroom. God, I don't even remember when it came out, but since version 1. And I've paid full price for both programs. When Lightroom very first came out, it was $300. Photoshop at that time was $700. That's $1,000. And on average at that time, they would come out with major upgrades about every 18 months. And upgrades were anywhere from, I think, $79 to $99 for Lightroom, and anywhere between $199 and I think $299 for Photoshop. So again, I mean, I can appreciate people who are not real happy with the cloud service, and what it has to offer. Um, but I personally have found it a really really good value, and the thing is Adobe is not the only one who's going to that model. New versions of Office 365 is a subscription service, um, and I think it's like they have an annual price and then they have a monthly price. Um, some of the Corel products, I know I'm not sure if they've implemented it yet, but I understand that they are possibly looking at going to a subscription service. Um, I think it's more cost effective for the company, and it definitely has it. And I've noticed the big advantage for me because, like I said, I have the entire suite. I teach most of the Adobe suite, so I have to have the entire suite, and I have to also have the latest versions of things. And if I had to spend that kind of money on upgrades and everything like that, I would go broke. So this is a great way to keep everything current at a very reasonable price. Yes, if you decide to quit the subscription service, then you lose the ability to use the programs. Um, but again, if you look at it at the annual cost and everything, the math definitely works in your favor. So that's again my opinion, but um, but it's and yeah, probably you're probably right. Not so much for hobbyists, but I believe as you move in, as you move forward, if you're looking at, I actually have a few friends who are more or less on the hobbyist side of things. Um, Outstanding photographers. I've got one friend of mine who's an outdoor photographer and does a lot of not just scenic stuff, but she shoots buildings, and she's taken trips to like Europe and has shot a lot of the architecture out there and everything. And she, because of the amount that she shoots and everything, she uses the Photoshop Lightroom bundle, and she will occasionally do paid projects, but for the most part, she just likes the flexibility that she has with the bundle. Um, she was using Photoshop Elements for a little while, and she quickly outgrew it. I personally like Photoshop Elements for a lot of reasons, but I can see how you can very quickly outgrow it. But she decided to go over to the subscription model, just based on the work that she was doing. So I've seen it for both hobbyists and for professionals. Now we're going to go ahead and we are going to start getting into the meat of Lightroom, and that's getting into starting to edit your photos. Now, a couple of things that that are definitely I'm a big person on following the rules until you learn how to break the rules properly. Um, However, there are some rules that are just steadfast, and you don't break them. Uh, when you start shooting, it starts the minute you turn your camera on and the minute you put that camera up to your eye to take your first shot. That's when this whole process starts. So when you're out in the field, to get the best, the absolute best images that you can, when it comes to this part of it, the objective out there is to get the best images you can. So understanding, going back to the basics of photography, understanding exposure and lighting and those things, that is paramount to be able to come into a program like Lightroom or a program like Photoshop or On One or whatever else you guys might be using, is to get the best possible image that you can out in the field. When I teach classes, not virtually, but in a classroom, one of the things that I tell my students is that my rule is don't bring me a picture that needs to be fixed. So if it's grossly underexposed, grossly overexposed, I don't want to see it. It starts with getting the best image that you can. A lot of other things that I've read and heard also is that I've heard a lot of people say, well, I don't want to use any editing software because I want to get the best picture I can out of my camera. That's awesome. That's a great attitude to have. However, pictures have been manipulated in one way or another ever since the film days, ever since cameras started to become, period. There's always been some sort of manipulation. Like I said, I come from a film background. Coming from that film background, we would do things in the dark room to adjust exposure, to bring out shadows, to bring out highlights. Things were a lot more manual back then, but we still did the work inside of the dark room to better enhance our shots. You see people like Ansel Adams, who I'm sure everybody knows is an amazing scenic photographer. Well, there was a lot of work that went into those pictures, not only in initially capturing those pictures, but in editing those pictures and using a lot of different techniques to do so. So embrace this technology. One of the reasons I was able to catch on to Photoshop so fast is because of the fact that I used to touch up by hand. I've done portrait work my whole career, so I learned how to touch up on an actual photograph. I learned how to touch up on a negative, so I can appreciate the tools that are available to me now. So trust me, if you see a professional photograph out there, even if it's minor adjustments, it's been adjusted in one way or another. So, I encourage you guys to kind of, like I said, to embrace this and really look at it for what it is. And it's designed to enhance your work, quite simply. It can be used to fix your work, but I really, and a lot of people will really kind of frown on that. Because again, I've been in the video industry for a really long time, and one of the big sayings in there is, we'll fix it in post. And we will jokingly say that in the photography world as well. We'll just fix it in Photoshop. If I happen to shoot a picture that has a bad exposure or something like that, I won't even use it. It might be otherwise a good picture, but if it's too far out of whack, I'm not going to use it. I'll have adjusted my exposure. Maybe the next shot I took is a lot better. So keep that in mind when you, as we go through some of this stuff and what can be done here. Keep in mind that it's been done since the beginning of time in one way or another, and that this is just a different way of doing it. Same process, different way of doing it. It's like the difference between film and digital. Same process, just a different way of doing it. So again, one of the things that I encourage you guys to do is I encourage everybody to shoot in RAW. And there's a couple of reasons why, which I'll quickly recap. One is RAW gives you the best possible image with the least amount of processing. So it gives you more latitude to work in a program like Lightroom. All of the adjustments in Lightroom are non-destructive. So at any point you can turn back and go to the beginning of your shot. Now I've got a couple of shots in here. Most of the shots that you're seeing in my little film strip here on the bottom were all shot in RAW. With the exception of the two scenic shots, which I shot in JPEG because I knew I was going to do a lot with them, and I don't do scenic shots professionally because I'm not any good at it. So I was out just kind of shooting for the day and just kind of having fun. So those I didn't shoot in RAW, but I did import those for a reason, and I'll explain that reason here in a little bit. So working with a RAW image is going to give you a lot more latitude as far as being able to make non-destructive adjustments here in Lightroom. And you can do, Lightroom has grown quite a bit from just making some minor exposure adjustments or a little bit of contrast or color temperature or whatever. And it's starting to become a very, very versatile program as far as doing touch-up and other things as well. So we're going to kind of hit on some of the basics of that kind of stuff, and then hopefully give you a really good foundation to work off of. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start with this first shot just as a starting point. I'll move over to the scenic shots because I know there's a lot of scenic photographers out there, and I'd like to sit down and talk to some of you guys to figure out what the heck I'm doing wrong with my scenic stuff, because like I said, I'm not any good at it. You basically over here on the right side of your of my screen, as you can see, again I have my my histogram. I've got my my camera settings, and then down below I've got some of my editing tools, which I'll explain here in just a little bit. Okay, down below that, now we have our basic panel. There's a lot of things you can do outside this basic panel, but the majority of the work that you're going to end up doing is going to be in this basics panel, to adjust exposure and contrast, bringing out highlights and shadows, so on and so forth. Now, if you're going to do a little bit more heavy-duty editing, you're going to start working in tone curves, working with color black and white, split toning things, detail, which is going to add sharpness, again, which you have to be real careful for, lens correction, and then some of the effects. Now, I'm not going to get it too much into these in this class because I just want to lay a foundation down for you guys. The next class that I do on Lightroom, which will probably be a little bit more Lightroom / Photoshop, I'll get into some of these other settings that you can work with, but the majority, I would have to say, the majority of the editing that you're going to do is going to be right here in your basics panel. Okay, and then using a few other tools as well. So we'll kind of discuss those here in a minute too. So right here, starting from the top, you can see it says WB, or white balance. Now, another thing that I encourage people to do is, if you go back and you look at the first podcast that I did, I talked a little bit about gray cards. I'll usually shoot a gray card when I start a shoot. That way I've got a good reference point for white balance. And a gray is a good neutral color. You can also do it with white. Gray is just more of a good neutral color, so it's going to give you a little bit better results. But I can use, if I shoot a gray card, that's going to be the first shot that I have in my library down here, and I'll grab that and I'll get a white reference off of that. That way I know where my white balance setting is, and if I need to, I can set that up as a preset, and I'm going to talk about presets here in a little bit. So now you can see I've got color temperature and I've got tint. So if I grab any one of these sliders, you can see I can either warm that up, I can, not cool it down that much. I can cool it down a little bit. Now when I shot this shot, I was using a flash bouncing off of a gold reflector because I wanted a little bit of a warmer look. So if I double click on my slider here, it will reset it back to its original position, in this case 4700. So I don't really want to white balance it because my white balance was exactly what I wanted it to be. Tint or hue, same thing. I can lean it towards greens, lean it towards magentas, so on and so forth. Again, if I want to reset that, I just hover right over it, double click, and it'll reset it back to its original, which is a -4. Now, if you look right over here next to white balance, you can see it says custom, so I've got a custom white balance here. If I use this drop down menu, now here's the big difference between a JPEG and a RAW. and I'm going to show you how to get around this here in a little bit. But you can see that I have several different presets here. I can choose auto, as shot. I can choose a daylight. So if I click on that, not a whole lot of difference there, a little bit of a difference. I'm not sure if you guys can see it or not. I'll go to a cloudy day. Warms it up a little bit more. You can see my settings over here change from 6500 to plus 10. Go down, shade. Again, now I'm at 7500 plus 10. Different types of lighting, tungsten lighting. Tungsten lighting has a tendency to be a little bit more yellow. And you can see that I went to, what was that, 2850 and 0. Okay. Fluorescent lighting. Fluorescent lighting gives you some greens, so it's going to bring out a little bit more of the reds and the blues. So you can see 3800 plus 21 and so forth. I'm not going to go through all these. So I'm going to go back to as shot. So 47 minus 4. Now, you can see, again, this is my raw picture. Now, my scenic shot here is JPEG. Okay, let me let that call up here for just a second. So I've got a JPEG picture here. Okay, now this is the advantage of raw. If I go over here to my white balance and I click on this menu item, now I'm only down to 3 different presets: as shot, auto, and custom. Now, custom is if I move these sliders myself. Now, here's the neat part about this. There's a way around this. If you have stuff that you did shoot in JPEG and you want to try different white balance settings on it, obviously the way it sits right now, you can't do it. There's no way to do it. But I'm going to show you guys a way to do it. So what I'm going to do, and you can tell these pictures are completely unrelated. I'm going to go back to this first one here. Okay, so this is the route that you would follow to do this. So here we go. So I'm going to come over here to my white balance presets, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to start off with daylight. Click on daylight. Okay, makes a little bit of a change. Now, if I go over here to the left side of my screen, and I go to my presets, if I click on the plus sign, you can see it says create new preset. Click on that. I'll come up with this dialog box here. Okay, and you can see there's a lot of different things in here. Okay, and it gets pretty confusing. Well, at this point, all I want to make sure that I want to do, or that I want to save as a preset, is my white balance. Okay, so again, I've picked daylight over here with my raw file. Okay, I am going to call this user preset daylight, and I'll only do a couple of these because I'm a really slow person who types. Now, I don't want all of this stuff selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, I'm going to say check none. Okay, so everything unchecks except for process version. Process version should always be checked. It's kind of a Lightroom thing. It's a little technical and a little bit weird to explain. But make sure that that is always checked. So now the only other thing that I want to check here is my white balance. Okay, so now I've got my white balance checked. I hit create. There's my daylight under user presets right here on the left hand side. So I'll go down to my next one. Call up my picture back here again. What happened to it? Okay, whoops. Okay, so again, I'm going to change my white balance from daylight to cloudy. And again, preset. As you can see, it saved my last selection, so only white balance is saved, or is checked rather, along with process version. And I'm going to call this cloudy. Okay, I'm just going to do 2 of them. Okay, so now you can see I've got those presets available to me here. And again, it doesn't matter that that these 2 pictures are not related. It's simply taking the values of daylight, the values of a cloudy day, the values of tungsten lighting, fluorescent lighting, so on and so forth, and it's applying those, I guess for lack of a better term, generic presets to be able to apply them to something else. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to call up my JPEG. Okay, so now all I got to do is come over here to my presets. Now here's kind of the cool part about this. If I hover over, and this might be a little tough to see, but look in this preview window here on the left hand side in the upper left. Now if I hover over cloudy, you're going to see a preview of that. Okay, if I hover over daylight, now this is pretty close to daylight, so I'm not sure you're going to see much of a difference, but if I hover over daylight, there's a little bit of a shift in color there. You can kind of see it just a touch. Okay, now when I have a raw file and I use the presets over here under white balance, I will not get a preview up here. Since this is a JPEG and I'm applying an effect, a preset, then I get my preview up here. It's kind of a weird, cool thing, but it's sort of a little bonus item. So if I click on cloudy, you can see the shift in my picture because now what it's doing is it's applying that cloudy preset. If I come over here, click on daylight, it will apply that. Now again, going back to the fact that the JPEG, with your JPEG, you don't have as many options here for your white balance as you do, let me pull up my raw file here, as you do with a raw file. Okay, so that's one way to kind of skirt around that whole thing. Now, it's not going to be perfect because JPEGs are processed to begin with, but it's going to be pretty darn close. And again, it's one of those things where really the only person that's going to notice something like that is you, the photographer. Okay, so that's my little cool tip for kind of cheating Lightroom a little bit when it comes to the difference in working between JPEGs and RAW files. Keep in mind also that when you do add a preset, and you save out your JPEG, it's going to take a little bit of an extra hit. So unfortunately, when you process a processed picture, it continues to take hits as you process it down. So again, one of those things, if you want a round trip between Lightroom and Photoshop, don't save it out. Open up in Photoshop, save it again, bring it back in Lightroom, do some more stuff to it, and then save it again, because then you've knocked it down 3-4 generations by then. Okay, and I'm going to show you guys how to round trip real quick. So that's my color temperature and my white balance. Everything else other than that is pretty straightforward here. You've got exposure settings. So again, I can come over here and I can hit auto. Sometimes auto will work pretty well. I would have to say the majority of the time is I would advise you to put the time into it as opposed to just hitting the auto button, which I just did. And you can see it brightened things up. It took my exposure up plus 0.60 stops. It added some contrast. It took my highlights and my shadows, and it made adjustments to pretty much everything in there. But when I look at it, to me, it's way blown out. I'm not really thrilled with the way it looks. So I'm going to just go down here at the very bottom here and click on Reset. Okay, so once I've clicked on Reset, again, it takes everything back to 0, to all of their default positions here. So generally what I start working with is I'll start working with my exposure. So I want to bring the exposure up, but maybe just slightly. Now, again, that took it at all the way up to a little bit more than a half a stop. They do these things, and I wish they would change. This is something I wish they would change. This is my letter to Adobe. I wish they would change these readings to be in actual f-stops. as opposed to, or actual stops as opposed to plus or minus point, whatever they choose to, the numbers. 0.50 is about a half a stop. 0.60 is just above a half a stop. 0.25 is a quarter of a stop, so on and so forth. So you can kind of do the math in your head if you want, but I might not want to bring it up that high. I'm going to bring it up to about a quarter of a stop. Okay, contrast, and again, what I'm showing you guys now, it depends on the shot that you've taken. 2, it depends on your taste. I like things a little bit more contrasty if I can get to it. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to pretty much go down. They've laid this out in a pretty logical way. So you're basically going to work your way down. So if I need to bring out more of the highlights, you can see. And the nice thing is because of some of the improvements that they've made with Lightroom, a lot of these adjustments are faster than they used to be, and they've split them up into a way that things are a little bit more detailed when you start working with highlights and shadows and so forth. So if I want to bring out my highlights, I can pull my highlights up. If I want to deepen my shadows a little bit more, again, I'm personally, especially for this particular shoot, I purposely wanted things a little bit more contrasty, so I might bring my shadows down a little bit. Again, I want to, my sky's a little, you can see it's at its normal setting. I'll double click on that. It's leaning towards a little white, and it was kind of a very blue sky day that day, so I might drop that down just a touch, and then I can get into my blacks, and again I can bring those down to make things a little bit more contrasty, or I can take some out. Now if you're working on something that has a lot of shadow detail that you want to bring out, you would take your shadows and you would push that slider the opposite way. So say you do a scenic, let me pull something up here that's, okay, here's something that may work. Let me pull this up. Okay, so you can see kind of down here in the lower right hand corner of this picture, you can see the pines down here a little bit in shadows. So what I can do is grab my shadow slider, start bringing that up, and I can start pulling those shadows up a little bit. So between exposure and shadows, I can make the trees down here stand out a little bit more. Okay, so it's really just a matter of getting in and really working with these tools to see exactly what they do. Okay, now down here I have presence, which I've got 3 settings for presence: clarity, vibrance, and saturation. Clarity is basically sharpness. So I can increase my clarity, and again, I'm kind of doing things pretty extreme so you guys can see kind of what the result is. And basically what that does is it tries its best to sharpen a lot of things. Clarity I use very sparingly. I would probably use it more for a look than an adjustment. Vibrance, it just basically what that does is it brings out colors a little bit more. So as I mentioned, I used a gold reflector with a flash to kind of get those warm tones out of her. But if I bring my vibrance up, if you look into the sky area, it really takes that sky and makes it a lot more blue, but it also takes her gold tone that I wanted to get, and it just really makes it very yellow. So again, vibrance is something that I would use very sparingly. Again, it's more of a look than an adjustment. Saturation, no color, tons of color. Okay, I'm going to so I'm going to pretty much keep these reset. Now again, this is this whole section down here is to taste. If you go in with a good photograph to begin with, you are mostly going to be looking at things that are going to be a little bit more to taste as opposed to anything else. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back up to the top here for just a minute. I've got a section up here that's called color, and I've got a section here that's called black and white. So if I want to process this as a black and white, I can just click on the black and white. All of my same sliders are going to apply to that black and white. So if I reset everything, okay, if I click on black and white and I start making adjustments to exposure, I start making adjustments to highlights, I start making adjustments to bringing out some of those shadows. You can see get a little bit more detail in her top. Start adjusting my whites. So all these are still going to apply. Okay, it's just now you're dealing with black and white. Now you can run over here to the presets panel and you can see that they've got a ton of presets for black and white and some general presets, and you can actually import video into Lightroom and apply a lot of these adjustments to video. I don't advise it because that's not really what Lightroom's built for. It's a video, even though it has video, it's kind of like Photoshop has video as well. It's weak. And that's probably the best way to put it. So you can make some adjustments, but you're better off using a program like Premiere or Final Cut or something like that. So again, you can either come over here and use presets as a jumping off point. Generally, if I use a preset, I'll use it as a jumping off point, and then I will make my own adjustments to it. And if I do that, again, I can come over here, create a new preset, and have that as my black and white preset. Okay? So, now, say you've got a whole series of pictures that you want to give the same treatment to, and I'm going to keep this black and white because it's kind of a pretty extreme sort of adjustment that's definitely visible. Now, say if I want to take this and I want to apply it to some of my other images. Okay, so what I can do is I'm going to bring up this image right here. I'm going to click on this one. It's loaded in there, and all I need to do is come over here on the lower right hand side, and if I click on previous, it's going to take on the exact same settings that I gave to this first photograph. Okay, so in a sense, I can go ahead and I can sync those or spread those settings. If I have several pictures that I want to have this same black and white effect on, all I would do is if they're contiguous, I can do a shift select. If they're non-contiguous, I can do control and then click on every other one, or whatever the case may be. But you can see it's taken on this all of the changes that I've made here. Now, here's kind of a cool little thing. So say I'm looking at this one and I say, you know, I want to add a little bit more contrast, and let's cool down on the whites just a little bit more, maybe not that much, and let's bring up the clarity just a touch. Now, here's the cool thing. So what I can do now, I've made the adjustments on this picture. Now what I want to do is I want to apply the same adjustments to this picture. So again, I select that picture or group of pictures. I click on previous one more time, and it takes on the edited changes that I made from this other shot here. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So you can sync your settings in a couple of different ways. That's one way to do it. You know, if you find a look or preset that you like, you know, you can set it up as a preset, and then you can go in and apply it one at a time, or you can set this up, have it as a preset, and then just take and sync it to all of the other shots that you have. Now, that's there's a different way to do that as well that I can go in and I can sync a shot. So I have this one selected that I did all of my work on, and say I want to apply it to one of these other ones down the line that's still in color. So what I can do is I can right click on the picture itself, and I am looking for develop settings, which is right here. And what I want to do is I want to copy these settings. So I'll click on copy. Now if you look, everything that I had deselected when we did the white balance exercise is still deselected. So all I have right now is white balance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check everything, okay? And I haven't done any cropping, I haven't done any rotating of my picture or anything like that. So pretty much I'm safe just selecting everything. So it's going to still keep my settings. So I'll come down here. Once I've checked all, I'll click on copy. I'll move down the line. Let's go to this shot, say. Right click on that, go to develop settings, and go down here to paste settings. Click on that, give it a second. Classic black and white. Okay, so it's gone through and it's copied the settings of my original and it's pasted those to my whatever shot I picked. Now, if I want to go through and reset everything, I'm going to click on all of these pictures. Now, if you look down here at the film strip, and I'll widen this up just a little bit so you guys can see this. If you look down in the lower part of, thank you, of each of the pictures, you're going to see a little icon down here. And basically what that icon does is it reminds you that you've made an adjustment to that picture. When I did the copy settings or paste settings over here, one of the things that was selected was cropping. Even though I didn't crop was still selected in that list. But you can see not only does it show my my exposure adjustments, black and white, so on and so forth, but if you have any cropping adjustments, it shows that down there as well with this little icon. So say if I want to take these pictures and I want to reset all of them. So I've selected this one by hitting Control, select this one, and select that one. And I can come back over here and I can select Reset. That's going to go through, and it might take a minute here. Come on. It should reset everything you selected. Something they need to work on. Oh, maybe I didn't have those selected. Reset. There we go. And I didn't have that one selected. So I can go in one fell swoop and basically reset everything as well to its original state. And you can see now, if you look in the lower right hand corner, the little icon is now gone. So that means your picture is set back to its original state. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions? Kind of an aesthetic thing here, just to kind of help you guys out as well. When you have a picture selected, if you look over here on the edges of these windows, because you can see everything is docked, if I need a little bit more room to work, say if I'm working in the develop module and I'm working with these settings, but I want a little bit of room, I can come over here, and if you can see right here on the very left hand side in the middle, I'm going to click on that, and my computer's doing weird things, and it collapses, oops, it collapses that panel. Should collapse that panel. There we go. So it will collapse that panel for you. It'll give you a little bit more room to work if you need that. And you can see that that is actually available down here at the very bottom of your film strip, all the way over here on the right. And I believe if I move this out of the way, up here on the top. So you can got a couple of different ways to do that. Okay. Now, if for some reason you need to crop and or straighten a shot, I'm going to pull up one of these scenic shots real quick. My horizon's just a little bit off. It's not bad. It's not horrible. But if I come over here to the crop tool, click on that, you're going to see I get this grid overlay here. If I go to the edge, I've got a resize tool. Now, as with most programs, if you want to keep things in aspect ratio before you start resizing it, because if I grab this, I can start resizing it this way and going all crazy, which is what I don't want to do. I'm going to hit escape to get out of that. And if I hold down my shift key, it keeps everything in aspect ratio. Now, as you can see, the area that's not shadowed out, this is going to be what my new crop area is. This is one thing I really like about this tool. And actually, the tool in Photoshop, the crop tool, is now pretty much the same way. But what I can do is I can recenter what goes in that cropped area simply by grabbing, placing my mouse right in that area and moving my shot around. If I need to straighten it out a little bit, I come over here to the corner. You can see the grid increases, so I can look for horizon lines or any kind of vertical or horizontal lines that are going to basically confirm that I've got this thing reasonably straight. So, yeah, it's reasonably straight. Once I'm there, I just hit the Enter key, and it recrops everything for you. Now, here's the beauty of this. Again, it's non-destructive, so if I click on that again, I can go straight back to my my crop tool. I can move things around a little bit more. I can say maybe get a little bit more of the picture in there by dragging one of the corners, and then again I hit Enter. It recrops my image for me, so on and so forth. So again, non-destructive, real easy way to get in there, crop and rotate your shots. Okay. Any questions? Everybody doing good? Good. Okay. Now the next little item over here is, and let me grab. We'll go back to our first shot here. Next item over here is a spot removal tool. Okay. Now the spot removal tool, again, if you've used Photoshop, this works reasonably the same way. It has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. It's really kind of how you look at the whole thing. So I'm going to click on the crop tool, or spot removal tool, excuse me, and I'm faced with this dialog box right here. Okay, and basically I've got two settings here that I can do. I can either use a healing tool or I can use a clone tool. So I'm going to grab the clone tool. I'm going to increase my brush size quite a bit. And I'm just going to click right here. Okay, so now as you can see, I now end up with two little circles. And what this has done as far as cloning is concerned is it's sampled pretty much the same size area, but from as close to what it thinks is proper to clone. Okay, now I can grab this and I can move it to another location like so, and you can see it'll crop to that area as well, or clone to that area as well, sorry. So it's not the absolute best solution for doing cloning, but it is pretty good for, and I'm going to escape out of this, I'm going to reset this. But it is pretty good for healing. So I'm going to zoom in here. Hang on. I'm going to click on my crop tool again, and I'm going to zoom in. Oh, come on. I'm hitting the wrong one here. I'm hitting exposure. The shortcut key for that is going to be Control if you're on a PC, or Command if you're on a Mac, to zoom in or zoom out. So Control plus. So I'll go back to my spot healing. And this time I'm going to select heal. And I'm going to change my brush size to something fairly small. She's got a couple of freckles up here. So you can see my brush size is just about the size of that blemish. So I'm going to click there. Gives it a second. You can see it samples from over here. I'm going to click over here. She's got another little spot right there. She's got a little spot right there. So once you kind of get used to this tool, it's going to move pretty quickly for you. Click down there. Now you can see one of the things it's doing is it's leaving a lot of these this overlay on there, which means you really can't see what the heck you're doing. So if I hit the H key, H as in hello, if I hit the H key, you can see that they toggle off and on. So if I want to see what I've done, okay, I can toggle those off by hitting the H key, and I can hit the backslash key, and I can see my before. So you can look over here and you can see these blemishes that I got rid of. And if I hit the backslash key one more time, you can see the after. So you can see those blemishes are not there anymore. So you can toggle to see where you're working from. Now, like down here, say for instance, I don't like the spot that it's choosing to heal from. So again, I can grab this and maybe move it just a little bit closer so my healing is a little bit more appropriate for that particular area right there. So again, you can go in here and just start doing some very quick spot removal. Got another one right here. I can take care of that. And again, I can hit H to hide so I can see what kind of a job that's done. And just kind of go through it. Again, once you get used to it, because of the paint, the makeup, and everything, it's hard to see all of her blemishes. So, it's just a matter of going in and making these adjustments as needed. I can also adjust the feather. So if I want a softer edge, I can increase my feather on this. And then if I'm doing cloning, and this is probably the only time I would adjust opacity and other than 100. 100 is going to give you a completely opaque adjustment. If I bring that down, it's going to be less opaque or more transparent. So keep that in mind. So that is now one of the other things that you can use here, which is kind of cool and a little weird and a little bit takes a little bit of getting used to. But if you look right below the this window here, you're going to see where it says visualize spots. Now if I check this, it's going to come up some really weird stuff, okay? But what it's going to do, and I'm going to hit my H key real quick to hide those markers. I can adjust this and can start seeing any blemishes that I might have missed. Again, on this one, it's a little tough to see because she's got the makeup on, but I can see I've got a little something here and a little something here. And again, I can go to my healing brush, and again, I can click there, and it will heal it. As you can see, I'll click there, and it will heal it. So I can either use this as kind of a visualization as to where I'm at and what needs to be done. I can work in this, or I can just kind of take note in the back of my head where everything is at, and then click, and then continue to work as I normally would. Now, one of the other things, along with hitting H to hide or reveal the adjustments that you've made here, if you go down here to Tool Overlay, and right now I have it set to Auto. So what happens is if I'm on the canvas here, I'm seeing all of my little tool spots that I've worked on. The minute I move off of the canvas, and you'll see I'm moving over to the right hand side here, the minute I move off of there, it automatically hides those tools. So you can either use H to hide or unhide, or you can just move your cursor off of the canvas to see and not see those tools. Okay, does that make sense to you guys? Cool. Once I'm done in here, I just click on the spot removal tool again, and it will take me back to my original screen here, my basic screen here, with all of my adjustments made. And then if I hit Control and 0, or Control minus is another one. My computer's being a little weird here, so I think it's because I have so much going on right now. But Control plus or Control minus, or if you're on a Mac, Command plus or Command minus is going to zoom in or zoom out. Okay. I don't use the red eye tool because I don't like it. There's better ways to do red eye, and it's usually done in Photoshop. In a pinch, you can use this. My advice is not so much. Gradient filter, again, if you're customizing things a little bit more, again, I don't want to touch on this because it's not going to do a whole lot for you kind of in the basic scheme of things. Next over is a radio filter, which in some ways works a little bit like the gradient tool. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on it because the one big thing that I definitely want to spend time on is this next feature, and it's the adjustment brush. Now, this is where Lightroom has gotten a lot more into doing a lot more editing. I'm going to click on the adjustment brush. Okay, I tapped on my adjustment brush, and now I have some of the same things that you actually see inside of the basics panel. So you got exposure, contrast, so on and so forth. So what I want to do is I want to be able to use some of these different settings to bring out some things, some of the things here in my shot. So the first thing I'm going to work with is I'm going to work with exposure. So if you want to start with a new brush, you hit new, then you come over here, and you can see you've got a list of the basics above this line right here. These are the basics that come as defaults inside of Lightroom. Everything below here, this is a brush set that I purchased. You can find custom brushes online for free, or you can purchase them in kits. This was one I purchased as a kit. So we're not going to talk too much about the presets, but you can find them online. Now, the ones up here are the ones that, like I said, come default inside of Lightroom. So I'm going to start with exposure. So I click on exposure. You can see the check mark there. And here's the nice thing about Lightroom and the way that this does this. Every adjustment that I make is separate. It's somewhat similar to using layer masks in Photoshop, but you don't have the advantage of layer masks. So basically everything that you do here is all on one layer. Again, it's all non-destructive, so you can reset anything at any time, but you don't have the advantage of layers. You're sort of piling it one on top of the other. A couple of other things that you have down here: sharpness, noise, moire. If you get like a lot of times stripes, you'll get that sort of vibrating kind of thing. That's called moire. You can settle it down there. And then you've got your brush down here. You got brush size, feather, flow, and density. So we're going to start with exposure. Okay, so I've got exposure listed here. I'm going to use my Control plus to zoom in because I'm going to start with her eyes. If I tap and hold my spacebar button, I get the little hand there. It allows me to move within my picture. Now, since I'm going to start on her eyes, I can also use my bracket key here to increase or decrease the size of my brush. So I'm going to decrease the size of my brush a little bit. And right dead in the center of that, you can see a little plus sign. in the center of the brush. So I'm going to tap down once, and you can see it puts a little indicator there that I've tapped there for my exposure. So now I can just start painting. Okay, and you can see her eye is getting a little bit lighter. And as long as I am, as long as that little indicator there is visible, I'm still working with exposure, and I'm still working or brushing in lightness into her eyes. So here's the kind of cool thing about that. So once I get that done, I can now, you can see my exposure is set at 2.35, which is just a little bit over 2¼ stops. But even though I've already brushed it in at that, I can grab my slider and I can either darken them up a little bit more, or I can lighten them up even a little bit more. So I can make my adjustments post painting in here. Okay, so now what I might want to do, for instance, let's go down to her lips. I want to do maybe lighten up her lips a little bit using highlights. So what I can do is I can come over here, I click on New, like so, and then I come over here and I click on my effect. In this case, I'm going to tap on Highlights, okay, and then again I come over here, I tap down once. That gives me that little indicator that I'm working with now, highlights. So I can come in here, and this is going to be kind of subtle until I make an adjustment, but I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to paint this in real quickly. Not doing the best job that I would normally do because I could be here forever. So I can paint that in and come over to my highlight slider, and again I can either boost that up or I can take that down. Now on this one there is very, very, very little change. I can see just a subtle bit of a change right in here. But again, if I just, as long as I have that little indicator right there, I can come back to this and add more highlights. And as long as I don't add a new brush, I can go into different areas and add highlights. Now here's the other thing. I'm going to hit Control and minus to zoom out a little bit. Now up here in her in the adjustment that we made in her eye, if I tap on that, you can see now that that little indicator is highlighted. That means I can go back and make additional adjustments to my exposure brush. And if I come down here and tap on this one, that means I can make more adjustments on my highlight. So I'm going to add one more in here. We're going to do a contrast, so I can bring a little bit more of this metal out and kind of the blood out in her face just a touch more. So again, I tap on New. I come down here and I am going to add contrast. So in my effect, I click on that, tap on contrast. Contrast comes up here. It increases the contrast for me. I'm going to increase it a little bit more. Tap once, and then I will start painting in. And then again, if I need to, I can increase or decrease that contrast a little bit more. So I'm going to take it all the way down so you can see, if you look at it, you can see the contrast goes away, and as I bring it up, you can see the contrast coming back. Now, what ends up happening here as you're doing this is it masks out areas when you're working on this. So if I hover over this, and let me do it, let's see if I can get a better indication here. I'm going to tap on the lips here. That's probably not a good one either. Maybe the eyes. If I hover over it, it's real subtle. It's kind of hard to see. I can see it a little bit better up here. But if I hover over it, you can actually see your mask pop up, and that kind of gives you the area. So there's without the mask. If I hover, there's the mask there. You can see it turns a slight shade of red. And all that's doing is that's showing you the masked area. to make sure if you need to go back and make any adjustments or anything like that, you can. So it gives you a good idea as to where you're actually painting in. Now there is one more adjustment that I'm going to show you guys. But here's the thing about this. I've seen some people do skin softening inside of Lightroom, and it's not nearly as natural a look as you can get using Photoshop. There's a couple of skin softening techniques that I will be teaching you guys in Photoshop that are, in my opinion, and in my opinion alone, but they're far better when it comes to skin softening. I had mentioned a little bit when we were going through the adjustments about clarity. So clarity is what you would actually use to kind of help with the skin softening technique in here. So I'm going to use Control Plus to get into, or to zoom in just a little bit, and I'm going to kind of work in this area on the left side here of her cheek. Okay, so again, I'm going to do New. Going to tap over here under my effect, and I'm going to tap on clarity. Okay, and again, my clarity slider goes up a little bit just to indicate that that's the effect that I'm painting in. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start painting in clarity, and you can kind of see the pores on her skin and stuff like that. So I'm going to kind of go in that area. And now a couple of things when you are softening skin, whether you do it inside of Lightroom or you take the other route and go inside of Photoshop to do the skin softening, a couple of general rules here, and this is why it's good to do it inside of the adjustment brush as opposed to just doing an overall clarity thing. Because what ends up happening is, and I didn't tap on this, so I'm going to tap on that to let's see, you know what, I'm going to reset this just so we can kind of start from scratch here. Okay, and again, clarity, I'm going to tap over here. Okay, there's my little nodule there. So now I can start painting that clarity in. Okay, sorry. So basically, when I paint that in, and it's painting in just a little bit, so I'm going to go a little bit more extreme here in just a second so you can really see things. But a couple of things that you want to avoid when you're doing any kind of skin softening, whether it's in Lightroom or whether it's in Photoshop. There's certain things that you do not want to soften. Like, I don't want to soften her eyes. So if I'm softening, I'm going to soften up and around her eyes, but I'm not going to go straight over the top of her eyes. Anywhere that there's detail that needs to come out, so even kind of the nostrils of her nose, there's details there that define the face that you don't want to smooth out. I see this kind of a lot when it comes to people who are learning how to do skin softening and everything. The other important thing are like the lips. Again, they define a certain area. So when you skin soften, you want to skin soften around those, and you want to avoid actually painting inside that lip area. So you want to just keep it right around the edge like so. Okay, so I've got this area somewhat softened up, and I'm going to grab my clarity and I'm going to push it down, because downward is going to give you your skin softening. So I'm going to lift that that clarity. Let me see. Okay, so if I go all the way up, you can kind of see where it's real kind of harsh and everything, and as I pull it back in this direction, you can see it softens things up just a little bit. Again, I can hit my backslash key on my keyboard and show a before and an after, and it's kind of a subtle thing, but before and after. Now I've got my feathering up quite a bit as well. So and basically that's going to give me a super soft edge on my brush. So I can bring my feathering down a little bit. Flow is how much your brush is laying down. So I'm going to increase my flow because I do want to get this a little bit more, a little bit softer. And I'm also going to compare this. I'm going to go back to the the basics module and sort of give you even a better look at what clarity does here. So I can also increase my density, and that's how much over time it lays down to. So you can really start skin softening things. But as you can see, as I keep increasing these things, what ends up happening here is she's starting to lose the texture in her skin, and that becomes real unnatural looking, and that's where you kind of get that real plasticky sort of fake look. So as I draw that in, so again, I'll hit my backslash key. So there's before and there's after. Now it sort of blends everything together and looks a little bit muddy, and again, I don't find this the best way to do a skin softening technique. A couple of other rules that I kind of share with people, and again, experiment with it and see what you think. But the two subjects that I encourage people not to skin soften on are babies and men. Babies already have great complexions, so you might need to touch out a scratch or maybe a little blemish that they have. But as a general rule, their skin is pretty soft, so you really don't need to take the time to soften it up. It really starts looking a little weird, if you ask me. Again, personal opinion, so I don't want to force any of my opinions on anybody, but it's just the way that I kind of feel about it. The same with men. Men are supposed to be a little bit more rugged and everything, and if you soften up their skin, again, it's not quite a natural thing on a male. Okay, so once I'm done inside of my adjustment brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on it again, and it's going to take me back to my basics module. Now, I talked about the clarity slider, and this is going to give you kind of more of an overall look on her face. So I'm going to back this up again, Control minus, to back that up a little bit, and I'm going to decrease my clarity, and you can kind of see what's going to happen here. Okay, so I decreased it a lot. You can see how it just completely softened up her skin. She has no texture whatsoever. There's no definition here in the lips. There's very little definition here in the nose. Her eyes are now blurred and not quite focused in, so they're not as sharp and they don't grab as much. My biggest thing here is the fact that the skin is quote-unquote perfect. I don't like to use perfect when I do something like this because, again, it's not natural. So it looks very softened, I guess. Like I said, there's a couple of things, there's a couple of different techniques in Photoshop that will keep that texture, but yet still soften up some of the roughness of the skin, if there is roughness, and just get you a little bit more of a very nice but even and shadowed look. So when we do Photoshop, I'll show you guys a couple of different techniques there. One's a pretty simple one. One is a little bit more involved. So they're a little bit different. So now the last thing I want to show you guys here, I'm going to reset this picture because it's kind of freaking me out a little bit. So the last thing I want to go ahead and show you guys is I talked a little bit earlier about round tripping between Photoshop and Lightroom. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So it's real simple. Like I said, one of the things that I had spoken about early on in the podcast here is that some people will save or export a photo out of Lightroom and then bring it into Photoshop, do their whatever adjustments they're going to do or whatever editing they're going to do in Photoshop, and then they'll save it out as a JPEG, bring it back into Lightroom, and in some cases add some additional editing on top of that. So when you do that, your picture will have a huge tendency to really take a lot of hits in clarity and sharpness, and a lot of people think, well, because it's digital, it'll never degrade, but it will degrade. So there's a very good way to do it inside of Lightroom and going between Photoshop and Lightroom. And I'm just going to do a real quick adjustment just to show you guys what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to grab this shot right here. Okay. Now, say again, I actually like the tools, the black and white tools inside of Photoshop a little bit better. They don't differ too much from Lightroom, but again, this is strictly to show you guys the round trip method here. So I'm going to select this picture, and if I come up here under Photo and I tap on Edit In and Edit in Photoshop CC 2014, so I'm just going to tap on that. Now if I've made adjustments here in Lightroom, so say if I adjusted exposure or whatever, those adjustments will open up with this file inside of Photoshop. So those adjustments will all be there. So again, just to very quickly kind of go over this and show you what the method is here to do this. So Photoshop will open up, and it'll take just a second, and the picture will open up. There we go. And it's spinning, and it's thinking. Okay, tells me that it's reading the camera raw format. So now my picture is inside of Photoshop. Now again, I'm just going to do a quick black and white here just to show you the process of doing this. We're going to get into Photoshop a little bit later. So I'm going to give this a little bit more of a classic kind of a black and white look. Make a couple of adjustments here, nothing real fancy, so on and so forth. So then I just come up here, File, Save. Okay, and you can see it's saving down here in the bottom. It's saved for me. I'll close it out. I'll go back to Lightroom, and it will now import that picture back in here. And you can see it renamed it DSC_1359-edit.tiff. So it re-imported it as a TIFF file. The advantages of doing it that way are simply the fact that that it keeps the high quality of your raw file as opposed to compressing it into a JPEG, and you automatically go from Lightroom to Photoshop back to Lightroom pretty much in one fell swoop. So there's my original, and there's the one that I made with the adjustment inside of Photoshop. Now again, like I said, I did the black and white just because it was simple and quick, but to give you the idea of being able to make these adjustments and just round trip right back into Lightroom and keep the quality of your picture as high as you can possibly keep it, because that's the ultimate goal here, is your end product needs to be as high quality as you can to get it out there, whether it's for publication, print, web, so on and so forth. So that's the way that I almost insist on you guys doing it if you're going to go between Photoshop and Lightroom. For me personally, I go from Lightroom, make my adjustments, I'll go into Photoshop, and I'll just save from there. I generally don't come back into Lightroom and continue to process after I've made my trip over to Photoshop. So I kind of go one way, but again, the reason I do it that way is to keep the quality of the shot as high as possible. Now, the other thing you know, if you'll notice down here, when I brought this back in, you'll get this again, this little double arrow like you have on all these other ones, and basically what that means is that this picture is going to sync back to my Lightroom mobile. So when I pull up my Lightroom mobile, this picture, the black and white, will now be in there as well. So again, if I want to play around with any of the editing a little bit more, I can bring it back into Lightroom on the desktop and continue from there. Okay, so again, if you guys have any questions for me, this was more or less the last thing I wanted to show you guys, but if you guys have any more questions for me, again, you can reach me at illuminationclasses@gmail.com. Drop me a line, and if you have any questions about anything, or you can get me on Facebook if you have any questions about anything. Now, the class that I want to do coming up is going to be kind of an intro to Photoshop. And again, I might revisit this little round trip thing when I do that. But I want to start getting you guys who are using Photoshop a little bit more acclimated to some of the things that you can do in there. Photoshop, it's pretty deep, and I know when I first started Photoshop, it was very intimidating for me. So hopefully some of the things that I show you guys will sort of tame that intimidation down a little bit. But until then, again, like I said, you can reach me at illuminationclasses.com, or I'm sorry, illuminationclasses@gmail.com. And once I put this up on YouTube, again, I really ask that you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel, and it'll keep you updated on new things that I put up there. I may start doing some little quick tutorials on just separate techniques at some point here, but I want to get some of these classes laid down and ready for you guys before I do some of the small quick tutorials. So again, thank you guys for hanging out, thank you guys for joining in, and thank you guys for supporting me. Until next time, we will get back to Photoshop, so we'll see you then. Thanks. Have a good night.